If you've saved diligently in a traditional IRA or 401k, you probably did so to create some sort of freedom within your financial plan, whether that be for you to be able to spend money freely in retirement or for the legacy that you leave behind to your kids and grandkids. But what many investors don't realize is that your IRA can quickly turn into a tax bomb for your kids after you're gone. Thanks to recent changes in the law, specifically the elimination of the stretch IRA, the IRS now has a much shorter time in which it collects tax revenues from money that you leave behind inside of your traditional IRAs and 401ks, and the consequences of this can be very costly. In this video, I'll show you how inherited IRAs really work, how the 10-year rule will affect your legacy, why naming the right beneficiaries is one of the most powerful things you can do, and how strategies like pre-death Roth conversions can help reduce the tax burden for your heirs. And before we dive in, my name is Ryan Knoll. I'm a certified financial planner and founder of Nav Wealth Partners, a financial planning firm that helps clients nationwide make smart money decisions. Let's jump into the video. So let's start with the big shift in tax policy. Before 2020, most non-spouse beneficiaries of an IRA, like adult children, could stretch required minimum distributions over their life expectancy. This allowed the inherited IRA to keep growing tax deferred for decades, and the annual tax impact stayed relatively low, assuming your kids were relatively young. But the Secure Act changed everything. Now, most non-spouse beneficiaries must fully withdraw the entire IRA balance within 10 years of the original owner's death. So if you passed away today in August of 2025, by December 31st of 2035, your non-spouse beneficiary would need to completely liquidate your IRA. There is no annual required minimum distributions that they have to take, but the account needs to be completely liquidated by that 10-year anniversary. And here's the problem. Imagine your kids inherit a $1 million IRA in their 40s or 50s while they're just entering or are in their peak earning years. That extra income, it could push them into a very high tax bracket, something like the 32, the 35, or even the 37% federal tax bracket, and possibly more with state income tax depending on where you live. It's not uncommon for clients that I work with to be making over $500,000 a year, and then they inherit an IRA or a 401k from their parents that's upwards of 7 figures. So when you factor in what they have to withdraw from the IRA on top of their income, which is already a very healthy amount, it's very likely that they're going to be paying taxes at the 35 or the 37% level because we didn't do any planning ahead of time. This is what the government loves to see, huge tax collections after you're gone on the money you work so hard for. But don't worry, we can come up with a plan that'll help you and your family pay as little in tax as legally possible while also retaining your legacy. So we're going to start by trying to understand what exactly the 10-year rule is and how we can use it to our advantage. So we're going to assume that you've done no pre-planning, so there's been no strategic Roth conversions. You simply left your daughter, in this instance, a $1 million IRA. So let's break this down with that example. So say your daughter inherits that $1 million. She has 10 years to withdraw every single dollar from that portfolio. There's no required minimum distributions annually, but the account needs to be liquidated by the 10-year anniversary of your passing. So over a 10-year time frame, that $1 million, well, it could very easily grow to $2 million or more. If she waits till the 10th year and withdraws it all at once, that $2 million becomes a taxable event, which is likely to be completely or partially taxed at 37%. Even if she spaces it out evenly, say $100,000 per year, that still adds significant taxable income on top of her job, bonuses, and investment income. It could also impact things like her Medicare premiums if she's older, capital gains taxes, eligibility for tax credits or deductions, and if she's not working with an advisor, she might even not realize the full impact of the tax savings she could have had until that point in time. That additional $2 million in income is going to cost her roughly $735,000 in taxes at that point in time. She will walk away with $1.265 million from your $2 million IRA. So nearly 40% of it's gone because of taxes. But had we started taking distributions earlier when their salaries were lower, let's say they started taking distributions in year one right after you pass and their salaries were around $300,000, and we spread out the distributions over a 10-year period of time at lower marginal tax rates, she likely would have not only paid less in tax, but would have walked away with more after-tax dollars by strategically structuring these distributions. Now let's talk a little bit about what you can do while you're still alive in order to lessen this burden on your family. One of the most effective ways to reduce this future tax burden is through strategic Roth conversions while you're still alive. And here's how it works. Each year you convert a portion of your traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. You pay the taxes now, potentially at a lower tax bracket than your heirs will face. And once it's in a Roth, this money grows tax-free and qualified withdrawals are tax-free for your heirs. Roth IRAs are also subject to the 10-year rule, but there's no taxes due when those withdrawals happen. This means your kids can let the Roth grow tax-free for 10 years after your death and then pull all of that money out tax-free. So in the instance where your daughter inherited $1 million, took no distributions over the 10-year period, and had $2 million sitting in the account on the 10-year anniversary, she could pull all that money out and there's no income tax that she would have to pay on those distributions. But the key here is to convert it strategically. You want to do it during early retirement years when income is lower, preferably before you start Social Security. You also want to think about when your required minimum distributions start and come up with a plan to keep those as low as possible so you're not forced into paying higher tax brackets later in life. You also want to stay in a desired tax bracket. Target something like the 22 or the 24% tax bracket for optimal tax savings. And you want to coordinate this with capital gains, Social Security, and Medicare planning. When you do all of this holistic planning together, it's very likely that you can limit your overall tax burden, not just on your traditional IRA, but in other areas of your portfolio as well. Now, Roth conversions aren't for everyone, but they're one of the most powerful tools to shift tax-deferred liability into a tax-free asset. So in the example above where your daughter makes $500,000 a year and she waited to the very end to pull out the traditional funds and they were worth $2 million and she was taxed nearly 40% on that entire distribution, she pays absolutely nothing if you strategically shifted the asset from traditional to Roth dollars ahead of time. So that $2 million that she has in the account is worth $2 million to her when she pulls it out. That's the power of doing Roth conversions. The second strategy, and arguably something that's even more important than doing Roth conversions, is just naming the correct beneficiaries. And many people don't give much thought to their IRA beneficiary designations, but who you name and the order in which you name them matters a lot, both for tax strategy and legal protection. Here's a few best practices that I practice with my clients. First and foremost, you always want to name your spouse first. Your spouse is not subject to the 10-year rule, so anything you leave them will be taken out over their life expectancy, which gives them more time to not only live off those funds, but to convert them strategically for your kids and grandkids, or just simply to give them more money to live on. Second, you want to name individuals, not your estate. If your IRA goes to your estate, it could be subject to probate and lose tax benefits, not to mention legal costs involved with lawyers choosing how they're going to divvy out the assets you work so hard for. Always list specific people where possible. You want to avoid naming a trust unless it's absolutely necessary. While trusts can be useful in some situations when there's minor children involved, or there's spendthrift protections or blended families, they can also complicate the tax timeline and force distributions or taxes to be paid earlier. Finally, you want to utilize the per stirpes beneficiary designation when needed. If you want your pass to your grandchildren, if your child predeceases you, you make sure you utilize the per stirpes designation, which says that if your child predeceases you, their proportionate share of your assets will then be split amongst their 3 children. So let's say you had $1 million portfolio and you had $1.2 million in that portfolio and you had the 2 kids, you would leave it 50-50 to each of your children. So child 1 would get $600,000 and child 2 would get $600,000. Now let's say child 2 predeceases you or passes away first and they had 3 kids. The way their $600,000 would then be distributed would be $200,000 to each of their children. So it still keeps it in their family, it gives their kids the benefit, and you don't have to worry about how fair your distribution was to one or both of your kids. They're both going to get the same amount, just as the second one's going to get it indirectly via his or her kids. Now, it's easy to forget your beneficiary form, but this single piece of paperwork can dramatically alter what your heirs receive, what the IRS takes, and how your beneficiaries get that money. The final strategy now is something that we've already mentioned multiple times in the video. You want to prioritize leaving Roth assets instead of traditional. So if you're prioritizing your children or grandchildren in your estate plan, another approach is to spend down your traditional IRAs first during your lifetime and preserve your Roth IRA. This should be the last bucket of money that you touch, because as an inheritance vehicle, it's worth much more to your heirs. You'll also reduce your required minimum distribution in taxable income in retirement, potentially convert more of your traditional IRA to Roth, and leave your heirs a cleaner tax-free asset. This strategy works really well for retirees who don't need all of their assets to fund their lifestyle, and they want to maximize the after-tax legacy for their family. Finally, one bonus strategy that you want to consider if you're charitably inclined is you may want to use qualified charitable distributions from your traditional IRA once you turn 70 and a half, or age 73 or 75, depending on when you're born and when your required minimum distributions start. These donations will count towards your required minimum distribution, they're excluded from your taxable income, and they reduce your IRA balance and future tax liability for your heirs. If you leave money to charity in your estate plan, leave them the traditional IRA, not the Roth. Charities don't pay income tax, so they can receive 100% of it tax-free. Your heirs, meanwhile, they can inherit your Roth or your taxable brokerage account with far better tax advantage outcomes. So let's wrap this up with some final thoughts. The IRA you built to fund your retirement can either be a powerful legacy building tool or a tax liability bombshell for your beneficiaries. With the loss of the stretch IRA, it's more important than ever to plan ahead and act while you still have options. So to recap, there's a 10-year rule that forces non-spouse heirs to empty inherited IRAs within a decade. This can cause massive tax bills if not planned for. Strategic Roth conversions can shift the burden from your heirs to you, likely at a lower tax rate. Naming the right beneficiaries avoid legal and tax pitfalls, and aligning your assets to your legacy goals can make all the difference. If you're serious about protecting your legacy and minimizing your family's potential tax burden, this is a conversation worth having right now. At Nav Wealth Partners, we help clients think through these decisions each and every day, and we create tax-smart plans that reflect their values. So thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and as always, make smart money decisions.